Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the debut album from Glee star Lea Michele, titled Louder. But first, as I might as well admit it, I used to be a huge fan of Glee. And you know what? I'm not really apologetic for that either. Glee burst into pop culture in 2009 and turned itself into a cultural force to be reckoned with, capable of propelling songs and artists into the popular consciousness and the mainstream. And as much as it's incredibly easy to rip onto the show's sloppy continuity and characterization, haphazard writing, and ham-fisted treatment of some special issues and criminally fumbled treatment of others, there are moments where Glee actually earned some of the critical praise that it did get, thanks to good actors, emotionally satisfying arcs, and shockingly good covers of good songs. Now, I stopped watching Glee at the end of season 3, mostly because it pulled off a genuinely satisfying season ending, and I didn't need to see any more than that. And since then, I've been reading the episode reviews on the AV Club and Autostraddle, which have proven to be just as entertaining as watching some of the episodes themselves. But there was a time, back in Glee's early run, that I was very much into the show, almost going so far as to making an audition tape for the Glee project. But that even back then, when I watched the show, there was one character who just drove me off the wall, and that character was Rachel Berry, played by Lea Michele. Now, that's not saying that she was a bad singer. She stepped off of Spring Awakening on Broadway and had a ton of natural stage presence and charisma, but that her character could be so mind-bogglingly annoying and self-obsessed just drove me crazy. And in retrospect, my annoyance was likely linked to the fact that I do share some of those particular traits and refuse to admit it to myself. But putting all of that aside, Lea Michele has finally done, like so many of her fellow cast have done, and have started to move towards a more solo direction, life after Glee. Now, Glee hasn't exactly had a good reputation of turning its cast members into stars away from the show. Matthew Morrison's solo career really has not taken off. Darren Criss has done some Broadway, and Heather Morris will likely go back to dancing for Beyonce, so sort of a lateral move there. Now, the one who has arguably done the most is Chris Colfer, who wrote a best-selling children's book and wrote, directed, starred in a pretty decent indie film, Struck by Lightning, which I do remember liking. And while I suspect Lea Michele will end up back on Broadway eventually, she's trying her hand at pop stardom with her debut album, Louder. How did it turn out? This album should be better than it is. And you know what? I don't blame Lea Michele for all the things I'm going to say about her debut album, because the majority of them are not her fault. No, Louder by Lea Michele smacks of the corporate marketing that is selling it. And there are so many elements in the instrumentation, songwriting, and especially the production that reflect the dismissive non-effort of her backing team looking for a guaranteed windfall that will come with this release. And once you realize the cynical, twisted thinking behind that, you stop feeling, any sort of feelings towards this record and start getting actively angry. So, you know what? Let's start with Lea Michele herself, and I have no complaints. She's a gorgeous singer, she has a great emotional range, and she's working her ass off on this album. She's working with material that would not be easy for any singer-songwriter ever, and you know what? She manages to sell it, and it's heartbreakingly beautiful. And yet, she doesn't make the album all about that particular incident, and she goes for broke on love songs, on breakup songs, and even a dance number with the title track. She proves that she has range here to be a good pop star. As a songwriter, look, you can tell she's a novice, and I can't help but think that her collaborators aren't really the best influences on her. Now, Sia, who wrote a number of songs on this album, is a songwriter from the indie scene who broke through working with Flo Rida and David Guetta, but those who remember her early work, like I do, know that her songs tend to develop impact based more upon emotion than lyrical flair. And then combined with Christina Perri's own brand of awkward songwriting, it leads to a lot of clumsiness and a lot of hyperbole on this album. Take On My Way, a song about defying everyone, including your own brain, to listen to your heart and chase after love. But then when you have the lyric, My Heart's Too Drunk to Drive, which comes up a number of times throughout the song, representing all that heady feeling of affection, I gotta admit, it starts to get worrying. You don't listen to words of wisdom from people who are wasted. Just take my advice on that. Or take Burn With You, which plays with the girl equals angel, guy equals demon paradigm with Lea Michele, that she'll reject heaven and burn with you. Unless you're Jim Steinman, I don't think seeking eternal damnation is the best option here. What very quickly becomes apparent is that the lyrics are very broadly sketched on this album, which can work in pop music if you have the right sort of overly bombastic instrumentation. Think Jim Steinman, Meatloaf, Bonnie Tyler, or hell, go with the Killers. But I gotta be honest, in this case, the effort wasn't here. Forget good hooks, instead we have an over-reliance on clunky percussion and shoving any trace of real driving melody to the back of the mix. When we do get synth lines, they're the furthest things from catchy or gripping. They sound frightfully generic, and there are points where they actually feel actively off-key. And let's be honest, when we have a Lea Michele album, nothing should feel off-key. There are points where there are some strings that come in and try to add a little bit more Baroque classical flavor, or they try to slow things down a little bit with hints of a piano melody. But none of this is given much of a chance to swell or build a lot of emotional resonance. The one point where I feel that things start approaching very real drama is on If You Say So, and I almost get sucked in and almost get sucked in, because now we have the absolute biggest issue with this album. The production values are non-existent, and the production is terrible, even for a modern pop album. Not only are none of the sounds in the mix given any sort of depth in which to swell or build emotions, but it's all clustered near the front and top of the mix, leaving the percussion feeling top-heavy and actively battling out with Lea Michele's voice, leaving the melody to just get completely lost in the background. What's worse is that for some ungodly reason, the sloppy multi-tracking and backup singers are supplemented with vocal effects that completely suck out any organic feeling that this album might build, any sort of emotional resonance. Lea Michele might have had occasional bits of electronic assistance on Glee when they had a week to produce and record a song, but on a full-length album with a lengthy production process and editing, there is no excuse for a professional singer from Broadway to need auto-tune. I don't care if it's a pop album. And that's to say nothing of the compression on this record, which takes an already overloaded top-heavy mix and sharpens and crushes it down, which sucks the rich texture in Lea Michele's vocals or any sort of instrumental power and neuters any sense of real musical dynamics, and that is just hopelessly disappointing. And now we have to talk about the elephant in the room. In July of 2013, Lea Michele's fiance, Corey Monteith, died of a drug overdose. And you know what? I wouldn't wish that on anyone, especially a young woman who's only a few years older than me. And there are songs on this album, the lead single Cannonball, and especially If You Say So, a song that Lea Michele wrote with Sia's help, where you can excuse the clumsiness in the lyrics, because the grief in her performance is in that song, and it feels raw, and it feels real, and it has so much emotional weight. And yet, when the production is this bad, with a multi-tracking that doesn't know how to properly balance multiple vocal tracks within a mix, something I could do, I stop hearing about a woman grieving for the man that she dearly loved. Instead, I see a record executive leaning back in his chair and saying, well, she's a young starlet with a built-in audience from a hit TV show who will inevitably draw interest from people curious to see how she handles that sort of major trauma, and that's just a license to print money, so why bother with, production values, or making her sound anywhere close to her best, or being anything close to competent on a record, even though we've been churning out singer-songwriter material for former Broadway stars since at least the 70s, and we should have this formula down by now. Look, if you want to support Lea Michele, as I'm very sure some of you do, I don't recommend you buy this record. Look up the tracks on streaming sites, look them up on YouTube, or look, go see her live. But every cent you spend on albums in this vein encourages this sort of exploitative, manipulative behavior from record labels, and that's fucking inexcusable. But you know what? Even with that, this album isn't very good. The instrumentation is uninspired, the production is uniformly lousy, and the songwriting is nothing all that special, and I really hate saying that. Sorry folks, but it's a 5 out of 10 from me, and yeah. If you want to hear her sing, go buy the Glee covers. They're all better than this. And Lea, if by some crazy chance you see this and into the internet, that might happen. Lea, you don't need to be a pop star. You can go back to Broadway anytime. Or look what Jonathan Groff did on HBO with Looking, in a serious acting role that you can pull off. Hell, I'm sure you've met Lena Dunham at some point, and there's an arc on Girls right now about Adam Driver's character being on Broadway. That sort of role, it'd be perfect from you if you want to jump ship from Glee. There's options here, but you don't need people, especially record executives, taking advantage of you. That's not fair to you. It's not fair to him either. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can imagine this review is probably going to piss a lot of you off. Yeah, I'm sorry. I honestly wanted to be better. And I actually tried to tone things down a little bit for the review because I was so angry after I heard the album. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums coming out this year that you'd like me to cover, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, see you next time.